Welcome to another episode of Ventura Voices. I'm Jennifer Nance, Communications Manager and Public Information Officer here at the City of Ventura. Today I'm joined by Ventura Water General Manager Gina Dorrington and Fire Chief Dave Endaya. Today we talk about wildfires, and with our own Thomas Fire and the wildfires that we saw in Camarillo and Los Angeles, this topic is ever more critical for us to talk about today. So with that, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Great. Well, I mentioned the Thomas Fire, so this first one's for you, Chief. Looking back at the Thomas Fire, I mean, what were some of the biggest challenges for our firefighting efforts, and how did it shape Ventura's wildfire response today?
I mean, I think you see wildfire response being a lot the same throughout the state. You even look back to 2017 and now, when we have those disastrous major wildfires, it just overwhelms the community. You know, most recently in Los Angeles, they were overwhelmed with 3 major wildfires in the same time period. Really unprecedented. And, you know, looking at the Thomas Fire for us, what have we learned since then? There's advancements in the state, what the state provides us with pre-positioned equipment, how we respond, the intensity that we respond with has improved statewide, understanding that the more we throw at a wildfire faster, the better the chance we're going to get in front of it as a region. And it's never obviously 1 or 2 agencies, it's dozens and dozens together. So I think unfortunately each year we learn more and we get better. And you know, even in LA, it was an incredible challenge, but 3 significant wildfires in the same period was just something that none of us had seen. And we're learning from that still as we come out of that.
Well, and thank you. And, you know, I think we've seen that, you know, we've made a lot of different changes. I mean, since the Thomas Fire about 7 years ago, what kind of things are we doing just a little bit differently? Just kind of real quick. I know we'll probably take a deeper dive, but.
I think the biggest thing is the pre-positioning and the increase in resources. The local fire departments, I think what we call is our upstaffing, especially the larger departments. They're upstaffing on red flag warnings, wind warnings. When the weather is coming, they'll have more of their employees on duty on more response vehicles. And then the state provides what's called pre-positioned strike teams. A strike team is 5 apparatus, 5 engines, and a strike team leader, usually a battalion chief rank. And they will pre-position those in the counties that have the red flag warnings predicted. So you have an upstaff of people on each agency, then the state is reimbursing those local agencies to have these pre-positioned strike teams ready to go at a moment's notice without having to go through the normal ordering processes of, you know, we need this from Northern California or Central California. And it's really that reinforced, robust staffing that allows us to get ahead of it. And then obviously the air resources are just priceless between the helicopters and the fixed wing aircraft, if the wind and the weather allows them to be there. And I think it's just, that's really changed a lot, is how quickly and with what we respond when a wildfire breaks out.
Thank you. I wanted to take it a second now to talk a little bit about water. So thank you for giving me kind of some of that pieces of what we're doing for firefighting efforts and kind of doing it now. But I kind of wanted to take us back to the time of the Thomas Fire and talk a little bit about water. So I know that back then water pressure and availability concerns were present during the Thomas Fire. So, I mean, how has Ventura Water addressed those concerns, like lately?
Well, thank you, Jen, for the opportunity to talk about how water supports the role of firefighting for all the communities. And, you know, we, as Chief mentioned, we've learned a lot. And over the past couple of years, we've looked at our procedures, and we've, just the same as the fire departments, we staff up, we make sure everything's ready to go. We have critical levels that we raise the system to. We deploy backup power. We're ready ahead of the storm, the power outages. And we also then continually check in communications-wise. We upgraded our communication system and how we interact with each other in staffing. We'll go to a different shift. We'll keep staff on. And we'll be ready with resources and kind of contact our regional partners, make sure that other communities are available to help us if we need it as well.
I mean, you brought up talking about agencies, and this has always been fascinating for me, but how do your two departments really kind of coordinate in an event of a fire or wildfire response?
I'm usually the weather bug. I will send out the communications as early as possible. There are a lot of coordination calls, daily weather briefings for the fire agencies in the region that we all join, and our emergency managers join from multiple agencies. There's multiple different calls. Then there's webinars. And when all those happen, I usually wait for the summary email to come from joining those, and it has all the data, all the significant information. I'll share that with the city's city management team and city's executive team, and Gina can explain what they do, but each department acts accordingly with the update that I provide. And like recently, even over the last few weeks, when we've had this crazy January with red flag weather and these, particularly dangerous situation or a PDS, I've put those out every single day, and I've apologized for filling their inboxes, and people like Gina have actually said, no, keep it coming, because it keeps us prepared and it keeps us ahead of the curve every day to know what's coming. And so the process kind of starts by me sending that email and letting the team know what we're doing as the fire department, and then informing them, and then Gina can fill you in on what they do when they get that forewarning of the weather.
Yeah, so we try to beat that messaging. We keep our eye on it as well. When those National Weather Services come out and they say they expect some sort of fire, we also get communications from Southern California Edison about potential power shutoffs. And so we activate our procedures right there. And so when Chief sends us those messages, I will quickly send that out to all of our managers and supervisors and on-call staff, and we will talk about, they'll report back to me where we're at, and then I'll report back to the executive team, I'll report back to David, and I'll report back to our emergency services manager to let him know everything's been deployed, levels are going up. And in a critical incident where David there's a call and there's a fire and he's having to open up a hydrant, he's having to use water, he'll let me know. He'll let me know how many engines are involved so that we'll be available on the booster stations, or we'll keep an eye on that section of the system to make sure water's flowing.
Thank you. It sounds like incredible coordination from many agencies. We even mentioned not only city staff, but through Southern California Edison. We know this is probably the most public safety power shutoffs that we've seen. So really, really important to keep all of those elements in place, during those critical times. I wanted to shift us a little bit on, something very common that I hear in the public is kind of related to this is what we're doing and what we're planning for today. But we've seen a significant amount of housing shortage, and therefore a lot of developments being built, not only in our community, but around the state. So how are we planning for both the water needs as well as the fire suppression or fire protection capacities?
So on the water supply side, we have been planning for decades how to increase our water supply, how to bring in new sources, and we do urban water management planning. We do a plan every 10 years, and then we do a check-in report annually on where we are with our water supplies. And Ventura has gone through several periods of drought, so we have been able to look at those past experiences and look at what the demands were. One thing that's been really great in the city of Ventura is conservation. And our residents are conserving, and they're conserving at such a great level that we are able to manage ourselves through significant drought period, but knowing that the city has to grow, knowing that we're going to have future economic development and bringing in people, we need to plan for that. So the two significant projects that we've been working on is bringing in our state water interconnection. That project's in design, and it's going to go out to bid this year. And then we are in the midst of our Ventura Water Pier program, which is bringing in new water supply. It's bringing in a supply that is drought resistant, is resilient. It's going to be able to augment our water supply in case in the natural disaster, such as a wildfire, one supply becomes overtaxed. We'll have another one to rely on.
And how much water are we talking about for at least, I know Ventura Water Pier, I've heard, a couple of estimates.
Ventura Water Pier, if you look at the whole of the water supply in the future, it's going to be a 20% wedge of that whole pie. So it's a good amount of water to be available for the what we need to do in the city.
And I think I've seen that it's measured in acres per feet or yard or...
It's measured in acre feet, and that if you look at a football field and you put it 1 foot depth of water, that's an acre foot. And so originally we'll look to bring in about 3,600 acre feet up to about 5,400 acre feet for the city a year.
Wow. So it could be on average 4,000 football fields.
On average, yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of water. And I mean, same question for you, Dave, but what does that look like in terms of, growth or, new development in the city for fire response?
Sure. For us, as related to fire response, new development is always something we look at as first in the fire code, right? So when it's being built, the most important thing related to fire suppression is having water, having access to that water properly throughout a development, small or large. And then we look at the codes that it has to be built to, and clearly each year that improves, whether it's sprinklers, whether it's materials, those are things that are always, we're trying to prevent the fire from ever happening. If a fire were to occur, then it is about the water supply, making sure there's enough to that location should a larger fire occur, and then having access to those locations. And really that's what development is having access, water, and the ability for people to leave while we're still getting in there to fight a fire, And with development, a whole second consideration is every other emergency that happens. When people move in, they're gonna have emergencies, so it's not just gonna be the fire suppression calls, it's gonna be the medical calls and everything else, honestly, the all-hazard response that we do. So there's a lot of consideration with every development, but as related to fire, it's definitely having water and then access for our vehicles into that community.
And you mentioned earlier about pre-positioning with the state, and I mean, how relatively new is that? And I mean, if you could touch on a little bit more about, how critical and how much of an impact like that's made.
I would say it was getting going around 2016 and 17 as a state kind of run program. It was called something different at the time, but after, the year we had the Thomas fire, we were not alone. That was a horrendous wildfire year. Northern California got decimated, and then we had large wildfires down here. And as we know, following wildfires, we had the Montecito slide. A lot of things occur as related to wildfire. And so right after that year, pretty much as 2017 came to an end, the state really upped its game, and the fire chiefs were all supportive of it in pre-positioning apparatus and these strike teams around the state and around the region, to where now it's the norm. We can almost expect it. And so on an average, I would say from a state level, when there's a red flag warning throughout our county, even if it's East County into South County, and when it makes it to us, it's pretty much everywhere, we have anywhere from 10 to 15 engines extra, not even including the upstaffing, that are there purely to deploy to an incident that starts, so that they can get 15 extra engines on it quickly. And then again, like I said, the air resources, Edison has a contract with Orange County, Ventura County, and LA County for firefighting helicopters that they also deploy in addition to the agency's aircraft. And so between the aircraft that are out there and the engines that come in, if you throw 15 fire engines at a brush fire start, now again, not in 100-mile-an-hour winds, but if you're having a 20-mile-an-hour day, a 30-hour day, that can make a significant difference at the initial response. And that's the type of impact we're seeing is, when you don't hear about it, pre-positioning is actually working pretty well under the right conditions.
Yeah, thank you. Really great and clearly needed and working. And it, also makes me think for like Ventura Water, that's some significant changes that we've made on the fire front, just statewide. And you mentioned, Gina, kind of our long-term solutions for water supplies, but what other things does water do? And you kind of mentioned the tanks and things like that, but it sounds like you also do some things that are similar to pre-positioning during those times.
Right, so we have our rural agencies, other water suppliers in the area, and it's a call out to, do you need any help? And hey, this may be, you may have a drain on your system. Do you need more operators? Do you need more apparatus out there to help you? deploy your equipment. And you know, we talked. You mentioned the Montecito mudslides. That was an instance where they needed operators to help come get their system back online. So we look at it as not only like how do we address the action of fighting fire and coordinating water supplies and effort, but how do we respond afterwards and get the system to recover? One of the major infrastructure projects with the State Water Interconnect is that it's an emergency intertie. It's going to work both ways. We're going to get our state water wheeled through Calleguas, and Calleguas will be able to provide us our state water allocation. But in an emergency where Calleguas' system may need more water supply for firefighting, we'll be able to reverse that flow and send them our supply while they can fight the battle on their front.
Wow, I mean, that's huge, even for water kind of multi-agency response. On the local level, and I think you mentioned it earlier, but in those instances too, like within the city, I think I've heard that we'll fill the tanks up all the way and then have like generators for the pumps. Like, what does that kind of look like in the event of a threat of wildfire here?
Right, so when we get that warning, that power shutdown warning or the red flag warning, we're able to log into our system and raise the levels for the system. And that means that the pumps will turn on more than they usually do. And we'll raise the tank levels as highest as we possibly can to be ready for any demand. We also, throughout the years, have installed permanent generator power where we can install permanent generator power. And then we have portable units. So we'll deploy those. Operators will go out and check every unit physically, take a log of where their fuel levels are at. We then relay that message to our fleet department, and once the generators are activated and running, they will then continue to monitor the fuel levels, and they'll come out and refuel them as long as we are in that backup power stage.
Wow, and especially with the public, safety power shutoffs, I'm sure needing to track those fuel levels is super important. So, yeah, really great to know that your team's on top of that, and you're actually, really making sure that those are ready to go if there's no power. And that makes me think, and of course we're not hoping for this, but if we are faced with another major incident like a Thomas fire, and I think I heard a stat that you may have mentioned in the past, Dave, that the Thomas fire, the speed in which it was going, can you tell me what you can kind of equate, like how fast it was coming?
I think when we were talking to the community, trying to explain when it was traveling from Thomas Aquinas area toward Ventura, westward, I think at its peak, the stat we used that got people to understand what we were trying to not even chase, but just stay out of its way, was the fact that it was burning up about a football field every second. At one point, it was burning an acre a second in its movement through the brush and through the hillsides, and this is because it's leapfrogging. And again, we can get into we saw it, recently in Palisades and Altadena. The ember cast is really what's happening. And there's an ember shower that is being pushed by winds from 40 to 100 miles an hour, and it is just jumping, and if you put a fan on a spark, it's going to ignite wherever it lands. And so that's what was happening, and that is just how quickly it was eating up ground at the height of the Thomas fire spread.
Wow. And I find it fascinating that that's the kind of the metric to put into perspective is the football field. And it's bringing me back to what Gina just mentioned about how much water at least one project or program is looking to, kind of generate in 4,000 football fields. 1 foot, of water is huge, I think, to put into perspective. So I think, wow, that's like really interesting. I'm so glad that you mentioned that helps me even understand like how when you're seeing things and how fast it goes. But despite all of those preparations and things that we've talked about, we've even heard of it that all of that just might not be enough for our water system, right? And when Gina was mentioning the pumps and all of the tanks that we've filled up, why is it that sometimes, despite all of those efforts, there still isn't pressure in the system?
Well, it goes back to what a municipal water system is designed to do. And first and foremost, a municipal water system is designed to deliver safe drinking water to its residents and its customers. And that's built upon regulations and certain standards we have to keep for the safety of water. When water is put into the system, it needs to be properly disinfected, and it needs to be under a certain pressure. And so when you develop a new section of your city, you look at what is the minimum pressure that you need to keep, and what is the minimum disinfection level you need to keep, and how far it is from where those water sources are. And then you look at, okay, what if there is some sort of emergency, like a leak in the line or a main break in the line? How much more capacity do we need to build for that? And then you consider fire. And typically you're considering a residential fire for a couple of hours and what that pull from the system is, and you build the system to that. So the municipal water system within the city of Ventura is built upon where these residents and neighborhoods are located, the minimum pressure we need to keep, and the minimum disinfection level for health and safety of drinking water. And then we try to build for certain emergencies, but as a whole, to face something as large as the Thomas Fire, it's just not built to do that.
Right, yeah. I mean, keeping pressure, I'm sure is there a kind of way that you've seen that, like just as, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I live by analogy, people who know me. And so I've been a paramedic for 30 years. And knowing how the human body works, I see it as much like a water system. It's an enclosed system with fluid in it that keeps you alive. And it's designed to do that for a long time. And it's designed to take certain insults. If you cut yourself, if you burn yourself, if you break your arm, it tends to heal itself over time, a day or two. Then it's designed to take bigger insults, potentially, with a little bit of help, right? So that's what we do. If someone is injured in a car crash or has a traumatic soft tissue injury that's beyond their scope, we will come out, we will take care of that while the body is accommodating that injury, and we will get you to the hospital, and you can get stitches, and you can have, right? And then there's a whole nother level where you can be critically injured. And it is going to take a team of firefighters and paramedics, doctors, nurses, the hospital, the right environment in the right time, and perhaps you can survive that too by being worked on and having emergency surgery, and the body is designed to even take that level of an insult. But there are injuries out there that are not survivable. No matter what you do, no matter how well prepared you are, no matter the number of rescuers that come to the scene, how quickly you're delivered to the hospital, the best doctors working on you, some injuries are not survivable. That is what I liken the disastrous wildfire to, are those injuries. To a municipal water system, it just takes it too far. And it's almost unrealistic to design a fire department or a water system that can handle that level of impact and come out of it okay. And that best we can do is prepare, which is what we've spent this whole time talking about, for those insults that take it really far. But when it crosses that line, it is unfortunately something where we're going to do our best, but I don't think there's any system just like the human body. Sometimes it's too much.
Thank you. It's a really, I mean, it does, again, like, it does put into perspective. It's, I guess, when you think of what we're designed to do, and if, you know, we have a lot of IVs or something connected to us, right, that you can't really replenish what we have to keep our pressure going, keep our heart pumping, that sort of thing. So.
And I guess I can clarify, because it's not well known. I think people think of the water being used as purely what we're using to fight the fire, and wow, you're using all of this water out of the local fire hydrants. And when a home is lost or the fire takes a home down, all of the plumbing becomes open faucet. It's as if you opened everything that can run water, it's running water. That's one home. And you look at what happened recently in Palisades and Altadena, when you get into hundreds or thousands of structures, all that water is also just flowing freely out of each of those structures in addition to the firefighting flow that the firefighters are using. So that's the injury I'm referring to, is the burnt down structures have open plumbing and water is just running freely, doing nothing other than running freely, and then the firefighters are trying to use the remaining water to fight the fire. And that's the insult I was referring to as far as like an injury, is it's too much for that system to stay whole.
Right. Well, and I know for the fire department in terms of, you know, what is the top priorities when you're responding to an incident, and it's life, property, environment.
Yep.
And when we get to this critical time, if there is an incident, sometimes we do hear of residents maybe not heeding evacuation notices. Can you explain the levels of evacuation and why it's really critical to really kind of follow the official guidance?
Sure. So through emergency services and through community programs, there's a program that we like to adhere to called Ready, Set, Go. And it's basically being prepared. Ready is having a go bag, having communication with your family, knowing what the plan is if you ever have to evacuate, what to grab. Set is you're ready. You know, we've put you in an evacuation, a warning, not a mandatory evacuation. And my personal opinion is that's when you go. That's when you leave. You leave a neighborhood, you leave a community, and you get out and you let us do our job. I understand that's asking a lot. You know, your home is your everything, but your life, in my opinion, is far more important. And if there's a mandatory evacuation, we've reached that point we just referred to where it's coming and you need to get out, you know. And another example I've used in the past with evacuations is even the best of things. You know, I grew up in San Fernando Valley. I'm an LA native and grew up being a Dodgers fan, you know, watching games with my grandmother. And my entire life, when you go to Dodger Stadium, a place that's designed to house 50,000 fans, what do you do at the end of a Dodger game? You sit in traffic. Even though that entire place is engineered to have 50,000 people come and 50,000 people go, you sit in traffic. And so you can expect that same level of fluidity in a neighborhood that is not designed to be emptied in a short period of time. So it helps us if you know when and how to leave early ahead of a mandatory. And when it's a warning, it helps us a lot, you know, as firefighters. They will come help you or save you, but then they're risking their life for your life, and they're also not fighting the fire. And so, you know, my recommendation is go when it hits a warning. Please go, if you haven't already, when it hits mandatory. And you have heard, I won't call them success stories because as a fire chief, I think they're great luck stories of people who saved their home because they stayed. And I'm happy for those people, genuinely, that their home is saved and that they're alive. But, you know, knowing wildfire and having seen it, you know, they're probably there because the wind didn't shift the right way that day, or they would be a statistic, because no amount of preparation or firefighting truly saves a home. It's just what Mother Nature decides to do in that moment. And so, you know, not success stories, but luck stories. And we ask that you leave for a reason, and it's so that we can get in there and focus purely on your neighborhood and trying to save your home.
Wow. That's very, I mean, if any takeaway from this, I think that's the other thing, is just like leave early. So, and I like what you said about for the firefighters to make sure that you aren't the number one priority, the life-saving piece of it, that they can really concentrate on protecting property in the instance of those wildfires and those really tragic situations. One thing that you maybe mentioned earlier, but I wanted to kind of take it back, like that's all of the kind of active situations, but in terms of proactively, other things that the city's doing, the water department's doing, I mean, what kind of things can residents do to be proactive?
Well, going back to sort of in the active part, Chief talked about, you know, opening those injuries and arteries. There's an urge, there's a desire. It's like a sub instinct to go and turn on your sprinklers or start hosing down your home, and that's opening that system up, and it's taking away from the effort that needs to be made when fighting a fire. So, as hard as it is, I know there's this. You want to protect things, but if you could think of it in terms of the fire team needs that water, and that may help the entire system stay intact a little bit longer. So keeping that in mind is a reactionary, but as you look at the water system and what we have done, I mean, we've taken a look at our facilities, and we've set backs of growth, and we keep vegetation down so that our equipment is protected and that it's not vulnerable to wildfire. And then just the conservation effort that the community has done in order to have more available water, that there's not a huge demand on the system as it was every day. Now there's less. So we have some capacity to pump a little bit more, and there's not a huge demand in any time of day. Conservation has really helped to keep our water supplies available for these efforts.
Yeah, I mean, and something that you mentioned about the vegetation around, our facilities, I want to say we also have that for our residences, correct?
We do. So the fire department, we have an FHRP program, which is our fire hazard reduction program, probably better known around Southern California as brush clearance, or wildfire, clearances around a home. We have a very robust program here in Ventura. It grew following the Thomas fire. That's one of the things that I didn't mention was we went from inspecting around 600 homes to around 6,000 parcels throughout the city following the Thomas fire, with the support of the community, whereas before we were a little bit of the bad guy telling people what they should and shouldn't do around their homes, and then all of a sudden it was really people were interested to know, what burns, what's bad. And then I mentioned the Ready, Set, Go, kind of having that. And then I know you've covered on several other topics, both in Ventura Voices and just throughout our social media and city accounts with VC Alert and being warned ahead of time, being on Edison lists. We've talked about Edison warning people about the power safety, shut-offs. And it's really just about preparing beforehand. That's really the community. And their Ventura Regional Fire Safe Council, I'd like to give them a big shout out. They work with our community members. They'll come out, it's free. They will walk you around every square foot of your home and outside to help you be a prepared homeowner in advance of a wildfire. And if you do it as a community, you can become FireWise certified. That's growing very quickly throughout Ventura County. We have had several neighborhoods certified, and it's not just a certificate. I mean, it's the National Fire Protection Association certifies a community as FireWise when they're all working together to take steps as a whole neighborhood to become a little more fire resilient and prepared. So there's a lot more out there that's available for the community to do on their own and to contact, an agency like the Fire Safe Council to get advice on how do we best prepare, given where we are, where we live. We live in beautiful Southern California, but we have winds and we have fires, and it's part of our reality. So, to do the best we can, given our beautiful environment, that's what we shoot for through communications.
Thank you. Yes, and I know for, all of the ways to stay connected, VC Alert, VC Emergency, all of those ones. I know one emerging platform has been Watch Duty. I have been watching that, but can you tell me a little bit about, what it is and maybe some pros and cons of using that
Sure.
platform?
It's new and kind of new and on the scene, and I want to say it's one of the first ever. It's crowdsourcing, and it's basically, if a fire breaks out, we have apparently a whole ton of people out there that are listening to the scanners and listening to the radios and monitoring, radio traffic. And if something breaks out, it's minutes, and Watch Duty can update you. It's an app, for cell phones, and It will update you on a fire, and because they're listening to the radio traffic, they'll tell you the name of the incident, and people will put stuff in on the acreage and where it is and what's moving and what units are on scene. So it is gaining tremendously right now, but again, I'll be curious to see where it goes as a crowdsourcing, if it ever gets limited or if there's some type of a qualified input at some point, because again, you're relying on input, which is great right now, but you get too many people, or you just don't want the wrong information to come out. So as you know, as our PIO, it's very restricted when you are the PIO of a major incident. You clear everything you put out through the incident commander, so you are putting out bona fide facts and not just things that people are hearing. So there's always that risk on a crowdsourced app that you can't necessarily totally rely on everything, but right now, it's a good source of information just to know there's an incident, kind of get the basics on it, and then I would still refer people back to the agencies or VC Alert to get cleared, qualified, factual information. But it's a great platform to jump from, to have the basics and to at least know, there's something going on, and it may cue people in to start getting ready.
Yeah. I love to kind of see it. It's great to see citizens engaging on it. Like you mentioned, there can be someone listening in, and I know for a recent incident that we had at the auto fire, there was a couple of misinformation that came out over the radio, and kind of causing me to make sure I double checked and vetted it, because there was a report that we were at 100% containment, and the last I had seen we were at less than half. And in my experience and talking about these incidences, we don't jump from 50 to 100%, very quickly. So I know that that's a vulnerability with everything, right? And so I think great app. I like to tune into it as well to see that, but it's also really great to have everything else, the VC Alert, VC Emergency, all of the different ways, because you never know. You never know as things kind of change, and kind of finding somewhere in the middle on what's the single point of truth. So speaking of the auto fire, one thing also from our residents that we hear a lot about are just kind of prescribed burns, or kind of controlling the fires that happen very often in our river bottoms for both the Ventura River and the Santa Clara River. What kind of challenges, or what would that look like if we were to go forward and to do something like that?
Well, the river bottom, both the Ventura River and the Santa Clara River, are ecologically sensitive habitats. And so to go in there and do a controlled burn would probably have larger environmental impacts than an actual natural fire. And there's a lot of agencies that regulate those rivers and the different species that are in there. So it's not an easy thing to do. The solution has been not necessarily to burn, and most of the vegetation in there is the arundo, and it's to physically remove it. So there's a lot of projects, a lot of groups that are working to remove that in a systematic way to kind of knock down that fire potential. But to go in and do a controlled burn would definitely have a larger environmental impact on the species we're trying and working so hard to maintain. But maybe Chief can talk about just burns in general and what that involves.
Yeah, the river bottoms, you're absolutely right. It's very sensitive, and while it makes sense to some people to go, well, yeah, but if it's just not there, then we don't have the fires, and that's an easy, that's the easy button, right, to push. But there's so many things involved, from not just, and it's what's in there, it's the species, it's the animals, it's the plants, it's the ownership. If you look at the different agencies and that are the land trust and that are part of the ownership of, it's a quilt of ownership if you look at the two river bottoms. So that's one thing, is it's a very, I'll say, complicated and important consideration to just look at a river bottom. And honestly, in a prescribed burn in general, a controlled burn in general, no matter where it is, it could be up in the hills and somewhere where you go, look, it's just a hillside, let's get rid of that because it's making us uncomfortable. You got to realize we live in Southern California. Putting fire purposefully on the ground is an incredibly arduous task to pull off. There are just literally probably hundreds of parameters that need to be met. The Ventura County Fire Protection District has a very robust plan. They have a burn plan for a lot of the areas around our city that's actually state, property or some county property in there that I know that they've gone and looked at it and they have a plan, but they'll plan for the training, the signage, the staffing, and again, these are firefighters that are already working 48, 72, 96 hours, and they get pulled in and mandated to work a certain day when there's going to be a controlled burn. And, 3 things don't get met the day of the burn's off. And rightfully so, because in protecting the neighborhood, the last thing you want, and it has happened, is firefighters purposefully putting fire on the ground and then losing control of it and threatening or worse, causing damage to a community nearby. That, you talk about a nightmare. That is our ultimate nightmare. And so it is extremely difficult to have everything line up to be able to put fire on the ground confidently. It happens, but it's not as simple as maybe some people might think to just go get it done on a day when it's not windy. It's not that simple, and there's a reason for that, and that's for the community's safety and best interest.
Yeah, thank you. And I know on the other, side of this is we have our unhoused homeless individuals that are living down there. I know with our partners with the county as well as our own housing services to really do proactive outreach to, provide the housing, get them, away from those sensitive habitats in, kind of permanent housing. That's another element to this that I think is so important that, we haven't solved it yet. It continues to be something that we look at. So thank you for your perspectives for, what that looks like for each of your agencies, because it is not an easy ask and it's not an easy task to pull off. Well, I really appreciate you both sitting down with me and talking a little bit more on, it's such an incredibly complex issue. So we talked about, the pre-positioning, the, different things that we've done with the fire departments, the importance of evacuating, all of the things that we're doing with the water team and the supplies. But there's another piece of this with our community members, and you mentioned the Fire Safe Council and doing those programs. So I hope to have them for an upcoming episode. I think that would be really great to take a deep dive with them and hear from them their experience and what this looks like, because I think that's another layer to this topic that's just going to be even better just for all of us as a community to band together. So as always, I hope all of our listeners today can continue to visit our city's website, visit our resources, check out the links in our show notes. We'll have a lot of great resources that you can check out that our general manager and our fire chief talked about today. And follow us for the latest updates on everything emergency preparedness and wildfire. And we'll see you next time.